The morning fog hadn't yet lifted from the lake when Elena first saw him. She had taken her coffee down the path behind the rental cottage, wrapped in a Vic cardigan, notebook under one arm. The stillness of Meadow Ridge was unlike anything she'd known in the city here. The quiet wasn't empty. It was peaceful. That's when she noticed the man kneeling beside the edge of the dock, repairing a broken board. He worked with quiet focus, every movement precise, strong hands. Worn boots, faint stubble on his jaw, and eyes that, though he hadn't looked up, carried something ancient. Elena paused. She didn't mean to stare, but something in him felt familiar. Noah wasn't used to company this early. Most tourists stayed on the other side of the lake, where the fancy rentals were. But this woman barefoot, sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, watching the sunrise like it was a sermon, wasn't like the others. He told himself to ignore her, but then she tripped on a root, and he stood up without thinking. "You okay?" he called, his voice rough like gravel, but not unkind. She looked up, startled. "Just attacked by the wilderness," she joked, brushing leaves off her knee. A beat of silence passed. Then he did something he rarely did. He smiled. Just a little. Later that morning, she found herself back at the lake's edge, this time on a weathered bench overlooking the water. Her notebook was open, pages blank. He returned, carrying a box of old tools. "Writer?" he asked, gesturing at the notebook. "Counselor," she replied. "Sometimes both." He raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. She liked that. "Elena," she offered. "Noah." They shook hands briefly. His palm was calloused, hers warm. Something passed between them, something not quite spoken. It wasn't a long conversation, just enough to say what mattered. She learned he was from Meadow Ridge, built custom furniture, lived alone in the cabin near the trees. He learned she'd come for rest, to breathe, to forget whatever it was that city noise couldn't drown out. But neither asked the bigger questions. Grief, loneliness, regret. Those came later. For now, it was just the comfort of presence and a shared silence that neither of them needed to break. As she stood to leave, her eyes caught something carved into the side of the bench. A small inscription. "You are not what broke you." She traced the letters with her fingers. "You write that?" she asked softly. He nodded once, not meeting her eyes, and something in her chest shifted. Not a crush, not attraction. Recognition. Mornings for Noah were always the same: coffee at dawn, work until dusk, silence in between. His cabin stood near the edge of the woods, simple but sturdy, like everything he built. The scent of cedar and sawdust clung to the walls. On one shelf sat a framed photograph, him and his late wife, Nora, laughing on a beach years ago. He hadn't touched that photo in a long time. People in Meadow Ridge still whispered about her accident sometimes. How she'd gone out on the boat during a storm. How Noah never spoke about it. They respected his silence. Mostly, he filled his days with wood. Benches, shelves, custom kitchen sets. His hands always busy. His heart always quiet. But at night, when the world softened, grief still curled up beside him like an old dog, familiar and unwelcome, but loyal in its way. Elena moved into the small cottage on the North Ridge 2 weeks before meeting Noah. She came alone, with only 2 suitcases, 3 notebooks, and a heart that had learned how to pretend it wasn't tired. Back in Chicago, she'd been a trauma counselor for teens, good at her job. Too good, maybe. She gave everything to the people who came through her door until she realized she had nothing left for herself. Burnout wasn't the word. It was more like erosion. So she took a sabbatical. Her supervisor called it brave. Her mother called it impulsive. Elena called it necessary. She'd chosen Meadow Ridge on a whim, remembering a childhood summer spent there with her aunt. The lake, the trees, the stillness. She hoped to write again. Not for anyone else, just for herself, but the words hadn't come. Not yet. What did come were long walks, quiet breakfasts, and the memory of her brother's overdose that still haunted her on the coldest nights. Meadow wasn't loud about its charm. It didn't try to impress you. It just was a cluster of weather-worn shops, a bakery that smelled like home, a general store with postcards from 20 years ago still pinned to the corkboard. People nodded hello. No one asked questions they didn't need answers to. Elena found peace in its pace. She'd sit on the bookstore porch and sip coffee for an hour. The owner, Margaret, never rushed her. Noah, too, blended into the rhythm. His workshop sat behind the general store, and every piece he built had his silent touch. People said he was gruff. Elena thought he was gentle, just protected. Elena started each day by writing a few words. Even if they didn't make sense, Noah started each day sanding away something invisible from his work. She walked the same path by the lake every evening. He watched the sunset from his porch with a blanket and tea, and though they weren't quite thinking of each other yet, they were starting to notice the moments when their lives almost touched Dot by the second week. It became habit. She'd come to the bench near the dock each morning. With her coffee, he'd walk by with a toolbox or wood in his arms. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just exchanged a nod. But one morning, he sat beside her. And neither of them said anything. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It just felt like something that might turn into belonging. The late October mornings in Meadow Ridge began with a soft chill in the air and the scent of pine drifting from the woods. The leaves had begun their quiet dance to the earth, and the lake mirrored the sky like a secret waiting to be shared. Elena had started to linger longer on the dock bench. At first, she came with coffee and her notebook. Now she found herself watching the trail that curved around the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, Noah, with his steady stride and hands always carrying something useful. They began talking more, in small increments that grew deeper with each shared morning. She asked about the bench he'd carved. He shrugged, said it was just something he did to keep his hands busy. But she saw the way he looked at the grain of the wood, like it held memories he wasn't ready to speak out loud. She didn't push. She simply sat beside him, sometimes reading aloud quietly from her journal, not caring if he responded. He never interrupted, just listened. And sometimes that was enough. One afternoon, she passed by his workshop behind the general store. The scent of sawdust and cedar floated through the open door. She paused at the threshold, unsure whether to intrude. But then he looked up and motioned her in with a nod. The space was warm and orderly, with tools hung neatly on the walls and a worn radio humming softly in the corner. He showed her what he was working on a rocking chair for. Woman expecting twins. She smiled, her fingers brushing over the smooth curve of the wood. You build things people live their lives with, she said softly. That's not nothing. He met her gaze for just a moment longer than usual. I guess I like the idea of making something that lasts, he said. Over time, their moments stretched wider. A shared sandwich on the bookstore porch. Quiet laughter when a squirrel stole her muffin. Long walks where conversation moved from books to grief to how the stars look different when you stop rushing long enough to see them. Elena found herself opening up more than she'd planned. She told him about her brother, how he'd struggled for years, how helpless it felt to be the one left behind. Noah didn't offer advice. He just looked at her with such deep understanding that her throat tightened. You don't have to carry it alone, he said once. And somehow, that single sentence unraveled knots she hadn't known were there. He wasn't expressive in the traditional sense, but he'd leave her small things: lavender, sprigs on the bench, a carved bookmark with her initials. And once, during the first real frost, She found a wool scarf folded neatly on her porch railing. No note, just warmth. When she wore it to the lake the next morning, he didn't say a word, but his eyes softened and she knew. Their hands touched. For the first time in the simplest way, reaching for the same mug at Margaret's cafe. Their fingers brushed, neither pulled away. It wasn't fireworks, it was gravity. It was stillness with meaning. Sometimes they'd walk together in silence, the woods tall around them, the earth soft under their feet. She'd glance at him when she thought he wasn't looking, but sometimes she'd catch him watching her too, with a quiet kind of wonder, like he wasn't sure how she was real. One evening, she invited him to her cottage for dinner. It was nothing fancy, just soup and bread, candlelight flickering against the window pane. But when he stepped through the door and took in the cozy room, the fireplace, her favorite throw blanket on the armchair, she saw something shift in him, as if being there, being invited, and meant more than he knew how to say. They ate slowly, talked about childhood memories and old regrets. When she laughed at something, he said, really laughed. He stared at her like the sound itself could patch something in his chest. And when she reached across the table to squeeze his hand, he didn't flinch. He held on. By now, the town had started to notice. Margaret smiled knowingly. The mailman left them both copies of the same holiday newsletter. No one said anything outright, but the quiet approval was felt in every soft nod, every extra cookie placed in Elena's paper bag by accident. The romantic tension between them was never loud or rushed. It was slow burning, tender, like water rising inch by inch until they were both neck deep in something they didn't dare name yet, but felt with every heartbeat. And still, neither had kissed the other, but sometimes, when she would speak too softly and he'd lean in too close to hear, their lips would hover a breath apart, and the moment would hang there, trembling between what was and what could be. And in those seconds, everything else, grief, guilt, fear would fall away. The first time Noah called her Lena, she didn't even notice at first. It was while they were planting bulbs in the small garden behind her cottage. She'd asked him to help, though she wasn't sure he'd say yes. But he did, showing up with gloves, a trowel, and a quiet smile that reached his eyes more now than it used to. "Hand me the lavender, Lena," he'd said casually, and only when the moment passed did she realize the nickname had stuck. She didn't correct him. She liked the way it sounded in his voice, gentle, familiar, like something earned. Their relationship deepened like snowfall soft, layer by layer, until suddenly everything looked different. Noah started spending evenings at her cottage. Not every night, but more and more. They'd cook simple meals together, music humming in the background. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't, but there was a comfort in the quiet that felt like coming home. One evening, they sat by the fireplace, her head on his shoulder, a knitted blanket across their legs. He was telling her about the treehouse he built for his niece years ago, how she made him carve stars into the ceiling because she was afraid of the dark. His voice cracked at the memory, and without thinking, she reached up and gently touched his face, her thumb brushing beneath his eye. "You're still that kind of man," she whispered, "the kind who brings light." He didn't pull away. She learned he still hadn't been back to the lake during a storm. She didn't ask why. But one evening, when the wind began to rise and thunder rumbled in the distance, she found him standing stiffly at the window, staring into the dark. She simply walked over, took his hand, and said, "You don't have to be alone in it anymore." He turned toward her slowly, a flicker of something breaking behind his eyes. He didn't speak, just pulled her close and held on tight, as though her presence was the only thing holding him upright, and she let him dot in return. He became her anchor. When she had nights where her brother's face returned in her dreams, eyes hollow, voice begging for help, she'd wake with tears in her throat. He never asked questions. He simply pulled her close, grounding her. "I'm here," he'd murmur into her hair. "You don't have to hold it all by yourself." They began sharing pieces of their past like puzzle fragments, offering them slowly, gently, with the hope that maybe the other wouldn't flinch. He told her about Nora, about how he'd begged her not to go out on the lake that night, about how he hated that the last words they shared were angry. Elena didn't try to fix it. She just listened, hand clasped around his, thumb rubbing soft. Circles against his palm. She, in turn, told him about the guilt she carried, how she'd always been the strong one, the one everyone leaned on, and how, by the time she realized her brother needed more than her strength, it was already too late. She cried while telling him, and he didn't look away. He simply cupped her cheek, wiped her tears with the back of his hand, and said, "You gave everything you had. Sometimes that still isn't enough. That doesn't make it your fault." It was the first time she believed it. Their love didn't need to be defined out loud. It showed itself in his quiet attentiveness, how he built her a reading nook under her favorite window, or the way he repaired the old wind chime on her porch because she liked the sound, and in her gestures bringing him lunch in the workshop, leaving a note in his tool belt with a doodle and the words, "Don't forget, you matter too." On the first snow of December, he surprised her by taking her to a little clearing deep in the woods. There, strung between two trees, were delicate lanterns and a small wooden table with a thermos of cocoa and her favorite cinnamon rolls. "You once said you never had a birthday dinner where someone made you feel seen," he said softly. "So, happy early birthday, Lena." She stood there, stunned, heart aching in the best way. "How did you?" He just smiled. "I listen, always have." That night, they slow danced under the stars, bundled in coats and mittens, their laughter rising like breath into the cold. There was no music, just the rhythm of hearts that had found their match. When she leaned up and pressed a kiss to his cheek, he turned just enough to catch her lips with his. Their first kiss wasn't fireworks, Dot. It was home, Dot. And in that moment, they both understood something deeply true. Love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it builds quietly, beautifully, until you can no longer imagine your world without it. The deeper their love grew, the more vulnerable it made them. And sometimes that vulnerability didn't feel like trust. It felt like exposure. Like standing at the edge of something beautiful but uncertain, unsure if the ground would hold. Noah had grown comfortable in the rhythm of their days. He no longer flinched when she touched him. He smiled more. He talked more. But there were still moments when he would go quiet without warning, retreating inside himself. When she noticed it, she never pushed, but a part of her waited and worried. It began the week after he received the commission. A luxury estate on the other side of the lake had asked him to build an entire custom interior cabinets, furniture, fixtures. It was a big opportunity, the kind people in town whispered about for weeks. And Noah, well, he hadn't said yes. But he hadn't said no either. "I begun most days," he said one evening, stirring his coffee slowly. "They want it. Done fast." It didn't mean early mornings, late nights. Elena nodded, trying not to let her chest tighten. "Do you want it?" He hesitated. "I don't know. It's the kind of thing Nora always said I should go after." The mention of her name wasn't new, but it still hit with quiet force. "You're not the same man you were with her?" Elena said gently. He looked away. "No, I'm the man who lost her." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply true. But it carved something deep. In the days that followed, Noah began to pull back. Just slightly at first, missing their morning coffee, not answering her text until evening, but she felt it. That old fear creeping in. The one that whispered, "You're not enough to stay for." Elena, too, had her ghosts. The more she let him, and the more she feared losing him, She'd loved before imperfectly but deeply, and it hadn't been enough to save her brother. And now, every moment with Noah felt too precious, too fragile. Like if she clung too tightly, it might slip through her fingers anyway. One afternoon, she found him sanding a bench with more force than necessary. His jaw was tight, eyes distant. "I'm not sure I can do this," he said abruptly. She froze. "Do what? This S.U." He exhaled like he hated the words, even as he said them. "You deserve someone who's healed, Lena. Someone who isn't still standing in the ruins of what they lost." Her throat burned. "Do you think love waits for healing to finish? Do you think I'm here because I expect you to be perfect?" He didn't answer, just stared at the floor like a man afraid of the light. "I've seen people run from what they need," she whispered. "Don't become one of them." But he already was. That evening, he didn't come by, nor the next. Or the one after that. It snowed for 3 days straight. The lake froze over. The town lit its Christmas lights. And Elena sat alone in her cottage, fingers curled around a mug that had long since gone cold. She tried to write. She tried to sleep, but the silence was too loud now. Because it wasn't just loneliness, it was lost at the same time. Noah buried himself in work. He accepted the estate project. Woke up before sunrise, came home long after dark. He told himself he was protecting her, sparing her from the broken pieces he still couldn't name. But late at night, when he looked at the empty space beside him where she used to sit, when the house creaked in all the wrong ways, he wondered if he'd made a mistake too big to undo. Margaret saw it before either of them admitted it. "You've got the look of someone who left their heart behind," she told Noah one morning as he picked up Woodstain. He didn't reply, but the words followed him all the way home. And Elena, she still sat at the bench by the lake each morning, even in the cold, even with snow gathering on her coat, because she didn't know how to stop hoping. And because she knew deep in her bones that when someone ran from love, what they really needed was someone to wait. Just a little longer. The sky over Meadow Ridge was heavy with snow clouds the morning Noah saw her again. It had been 2 weeks since he'd walked away. 2 weeks of silence, of long work days and longer nights, of building beautiful things that meant nothing because she wasn't there to see them. The lake was completely frozen now. The bench they used to share had a blanket of snow on its seat, but she was there just like always, wrapped in that same gray scarf he'd given her, her fingers tucked into her coat sleeves, staring out over the ice like she could will it to melt up. She didn't look up when he approached, didn't say his name, just let the cold wind rush between them like unfinished sentences. He sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. And then, quietly, Noah said, "I thought I had to be healed before I could love you the way you deserve." She turned, slowly, eyes glistening, cheeks flushed from the cold. "And now?" "I think I was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "Because being with you didn't make me forget what I lost. It made me remember I still have something to give." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in days, her heart unclenched. "You broke my heart, Noah," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not because you left, but because you believed you had to protect me from your pain when all I ever wanted was to carry it with you." His throat tightened. "I know. I see it now. And I'm so—" He stopped himself, shook his head. "No, I'm not here to ask you to forgive me right away. I'm here to tell you that I love you, that I've never said those words to anyone since Nora, but they're true, and they're yours." Tears slipped silently down Elena's face. She didn't wipe them away. "Do you know what I kept telling myself?" she said softly. "That maybe you left because it was easier to carry grief than to risk being happy again." He swallowed hard, the words hitting like truth. "I was scared too, Noah," she continued. "I didn't want to need you. Didn't want to let myself believe in something that could vanish just like everything else I've loved. But I do need you. And not because I'm broken, because I'm whole enough now to choose you, even when it's hard. For a moment, neither moved. Then he reached out, slowly, carefully, and took her hand. The wind stirred the trees. The snow began to fall again, soft and quiet and full of grace. You once told me, she whispered, that you like building things that last. He nodded. She smiled through her tears. Then build this with me, not perfect, just real, just us. And in that moment, on a snowy bench overlooking a frozen lake, Noah Carter realized that love didn't wait for scars to fade. It simply chose to stay. Again and again, he leaned forward and kissed her, slow and tender, like an apology, like a promise, like coming home. She kissed him back without hesitation, because love, when it's real, doesn't need fixing. It just needs bravery. Spring in Meadow Ridge came like a slow exhale. The snow melted into songbirds. The lake thawed, its glassy surface reflecting a world returning to color. Gardens bloomed. Shopkeepers opened their doors wide again. And on the bookstore porch, Elena and Noah sat side by side, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs, their hands always touching like it had become second nature to be tethered. It had been 3 months since that snowy morning on the bench. 3 months since they chose each other, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. Life didn't magically smooth itself out afterward. Grief still visited Noah on quiet nights, and Elena still wrestled with the ache of all she hadn't been able to save, but now they faced those moments together. Noah had turned down the state project. I don't need bigger, he told Elena one evening while tracing the curve of her cheek. I just need real. Instead, he poured his time into building handcrafted furniture for local families, taking on fewer clients and spending more. Afternoons with her, sketching ideas and listening to her read aloud from her writing. Yes, her writing. It had returned to her like a friend who never left, only waited patiently. Words spilled from her fingers again, honest and raw and alive. She wrote essays, short stories, and finally, a letter. To her brother, she never sent it, of course, but she left it tucked between the pages of his favorite book, which she donated to the town library in his name. That day, Noah went with her, holding her hand the whole time. They made a quiet life, filled with small joys that added up to something grander than either of them had known they deserved. Morning walks to the lake, candlelit dinners, even when there wasn't anything to celebrate. A carved wooden sign on the front of Elena's cottage that read, "Love lives here." One Saturday afternoon, while planting herbs in the back garden, Noah pulled something from his pocket. A tiny hand-carved wooden box. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved with the word "stay." He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need to. "Elena Whitmore," he said, voice steady, eyes warm. "Will you build the rest of this life with me, messy and real and beautifully ours?" She nodded, too overcome to speak at first, tears slipping down her cheeks for the best possible reason. Then finally she whispered, yes, yes to everything. They didn't have a big wedding, just a circle of friends from Meadow Ridge, fairy lights strung across trees, and vows exchanged beside the lake that had once separated them. The whole town came out for it. Margaret cried through most of the ceremony. The mayor danced with the bride, and Noah kissed his wife under a canopy of stars. Later that night, as they sat on the same old bench by the water, Elena leaned her head on his shoulder and smiled. "Do you remember," she said softly, "when you told me I didn't have to carry it all alone?" He smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Neither do I not anymore." And so love came not as a rescue, but as a return. To Jolf, to joy, to peace. They didn't just find each other, they chose each other. every day, and that made all the difference.